The Lazarus Project is a private secret organization that is unknown to many governments, but is responsible for saving humanity from sure extinction hundreds of times. They've achieved this by traveling back in time and stopping various disasters from ever taking place. But a few people that know about the project are doing everything they can to take them down. The episode opens with George and his girlfriend Sarah getting woken up by their alarm clock. Today is a big day for George, so he needs to wake up super early. He says goodbye to Sarah before leaving for the bank. He meets up with the bank manager and proposes his new app that can analyze data and make business predictions. He's been developing it for years now, and it has shown great promise. George is now looking for a loan so he can start his company and get the app live. The manager is impressed by George's presentation and gives him the loan. And later that day, George meets with Sarah to celebrate, and while they cheer for his success, we see on the news that a new virus has started to spread. In the next 3 months, we see Sarah getting pregnant and then getting married. After another 3 months later, we see the virus has spread throughout Europe and people are dying by the thousands every day. In the UK, where George and Sarah live, hospitals are getting crowded and they're running out of oxygen. One night, George and Sarah go to the hospital for a checkup, and everyone in there was sick, and as they were waiting their turn, George starts feeling weird, and he starts to see things, but then everything goes black, and he wakes up on his bed on the day June 1, which is the day the episode begins. George is a little confused at first, as what he remembers last is being in the hospital, and Sarah then tells him that that day is the day for his app's presentation. George goes to the bank to make sure that the manager is waiting for him to give him the presentation, and he tries to explain that he already did this, but the manager doesn't remember anything, and he also doesn't have the money in his account. Later that night, he meets with Sarah and tries to explain everything that happened and tells her about the upcoming virus, but she really doesn't believe him. Days go by with George trying to explain things while Sarah thinks that he's gotten insane and tells him to talk to a doctor. After 3 months, Sarah has had enough of his insanity and she decides to live with her mom. George follows her out to stop her, but another woman named Archie stops him and tells him that Sarah will never believe what he says. She then gives him an address and tells him to come to that location the next time he travels back in time. The next 3 months go by, with George depressed on December 31st, and he sees Sarah hanging out with her work friend Carl at a bar. George doesn't bother and goes to sleep, and the next day, he wakes up again on June the 1st. He finds Sarah next to him again, and he kisses her before leaving to find the area on the note, and he goes to an abandoned building, and he finds Archie looking for him, and he asks her what's going on, and she tells him that he's a mutant that can travel back in time. She explains that 0.00001% of the world has this ability, but most of them don't really remember traveling back in time. She explains that 0.000% of the world has this ability, but most of them don't even remember traveling back in time. And she goes on to tell him that he himself has traveled 20 times before. She then reveals that she's part of the Lazarus Project, which is a secret organization that has a time machine and selects special agents and gives them the power so they can stop or undo world-ending events. She reveals that this organization has saved the Earth from nuclear wars, deadly pandemics, and more using all the necessary methods, and she even tells him that the reason people get the Rona vaccine in just 9 months was because of them. She tells him the reason that they're traveling back in time now was because they had failed to make the vaccine for the new virus in time, and she then takes him to the headquarters and he gets to meet the main team. He meets Elizabeth, who leads the team, and Greta, Blake, Eric, Archie, and lastly Shiv, who is the only other natural mutant. George hears the team talking about finding a vaccine for the new virus, which means the world has been saved, and they set the new checkpoint for July 1. But they also say that a nuclear warhead has been stolen, but they explain to George this thing usually happens and it's not a threat because this warhead needs a special kind of detonator that only governments have. George is then offered to join the team and he agrees, and at the same time, he works on his app and he accidentally finds who bought the nuclear warhead, and the name Dennis comes up, which Elizabeth reveals to be a former agent who went rogue. This now means that they have to take the threat very seriously, and the team starts tracking Dennis. In the meantime, George's love life was going great, and one night he goes to Carl's home for a small party, and since George knows that Carl is trying to get Sarah, he gives him a very bad investment tip. The next day, George is informed that the location of Dennis has been found, so the whole team travels to Paris to apprehend him. Eric and George stay in the communication car, while Archie leads the team and breaches to the building, but Dennis was waiting for them and he takes out Archie and her team. Eric and George then chase him down the city road and manage to crash him into a marketplace. But Dennis outguns Eric and kills him as well, and the police then surround him, and seeing there's no way out, Dennis triggers the nuclear bomb and Paris is blown up. George then wakes up on July 1, again, and he gets a call from Archie, and she's still alive and she tells him to take the day off. George then takes Sarah to school, but as he drops her off, he gets another call from Archie, telling him that they've located Dennis, and while he talks to her, Sarah runs into an angry Carl, who confronts her and says that George purposefully gave him a bad investment advice, and she tells him that George wouldn't do that, but Carl says that he wants his money back. Sarah then tries to ignore him and pass, but when he tries to grab her, he accidentally pushes her off the sidewalk, and she gets hit by a truck. Next, we see a flashback to the summer of 2018. Archie is on a mission with her co-worker and lover Ross, and they're in a foreign country to stop the start of World War III, but they fail, so they have to go back in time and try again. Back to the present, Sarah has been heavily injured, and she's taken to a hospital immediately and put into a coma. The doctor tells George to go home since they don't know whether or not she's gonna wake up. Archie takes him home and stays the night at his house, and in the meantime, Dennis is captured by the French police and transferred to the Lazarus headquarters. We are then taken to another flashback to summer of 2018, and Archie and Ross are trying the diplomatic approach and telling the general that the attack on his country was not made by the country that he suspects, but he doesn't believe them, and he retaliates, which starts World War III, and time is then reset. The same day in summer of 2018, which was also the day George met Sarah, he also starts getting flashback to the same night, and he remembers being in a house party and his friend telling him that there's a girl named Sarah who was also in the party that's just perfect for him. George doesn't know how Sarah looked, so he starts going around the home and tries to talk to women, but we see Sarah passing him and them not meeting up multiple times. Archie and Ross continue their mission, but they fail every time. They even figure out that the general was corrupt, and they kill him, but that still doesn't stop the war. They fail multiple times, and at the same time, George fails to meet up with Sarah again and again, and sometimes he gets close, and sometimes he even talks to her and they have a nice conversation, but before he can get her number, time is then reset. In the present time, Shiv visits George at the hospital. He asks George if he wants to beat up Carl, and George says yes, but when they get to Carl's home, George changes his mind as he realizes that revenge is not going to change the past, which is what Shiv wanted to teach him. They then go back to the headquarters and visit Dennis in his cell, and Dennis hasn't really been talking up to now, but when they come in, he starts to talk, and he tells them that he doesn't know where the bomb is, and they captured him before he could get it, and he then tells George that the Lazarus playing God should be stopped, and he says that they're not special, and that playing God with nature will only lead to worse things. We are then taken to another flashback to summer of 2018, and Archie and Ross have been failing to start a coup, but they figure out that if they kill the head of security, then the coup can happen easily. So they meet up outside a hotel, and Ross enters with a hidden bomb, and he then tries to plant it, but he gets found out and shot, and the bomb then falls on the ground and kills everyone, including him. Archie sees this happening from the outside, but she couldn't really do anything. She begs Elizabeth to reset the time, but since the coup has been successful, the mission is also complete, and the world is saved. Dennis was part of the organization at this time, and we see him getting angry with the decision that Elizabeth was making. At the same time, George finally meets with Sarah at a bus stop just after the party, and they get to talking, and the rest is history. Back to the present, George gets a call from the hospital, and he rushes there, and the doctor informs him that Sarah has died. He then goes back to headquarters alone and visits Dennis, and he then asks him on how to reset the time. Dennis then asks him if he's willing to destroy everything to save Sarah, and George answers by saying yes. Next, we see another flashback to 2017. Janet, who's a special agent and Dennis's girlfriend, has just found out that she's pregnant. They go to the doctor and learn that they'll be having a baby boy, and the due date will be very close to the next checkpoint. When Archie hears the news, she gets concerned because getting pregnant between December and June is a really bad idea. And it's bad because if a world-ending event happens, this will reset the time before she was pregnant. And back to the present, the Lazarus have found out the people who had the nuclear bomb are a group called the Lost Glory. Archie gathers a team to go to their hideout, and George asks to join, but she tells him that he is not ready for fieldwork at the time. George then goes back to Dennis's cell and tells him about the finding. Dennis tells him that he can warn the group through their YouTube page, and then tells him what really matters is the detonator and gives him an address in Spain, Barcelona, and a secret code to use when he meets the person that can make the detonator. George takes the info and sends an anonymous message to the Lost Glory before traveling to Barcelona. He arrives at the specified address and gets ambushed by Janet. He immediately tells her the secret code, and she lets him in her home. He sees that she lives with a young girl and starts piecing together who she might be. He tells her Dennis sent her and that he needs the detonator, and she tells him that she can get it done by the next one, and she tells him that he can sleep on the sofa for that day. During dinner, George asks her if she's Janet, and he tells her that Archie had told him about a woman named Janet who also lost someone. Janet tells him that he doesn't know the full story and decides to tell him all, and we're all taken back to another flashback to 2017, and Janet's pregnancy is going well, and they're getting very close to the checkpoint date. One day, Shiv is on a mission to take out a biochemical weapon distributor, and the man is trying to sell the weapon to North Koreans, so he's a high target. Shiv sets up on a roof and takes out the guy using a sniper, and Janet then gives birth to a boy a little earlier than anticipated, which is 2 weeks before the checkpoint. Things seem to be going okay, but Shiv informs Dennis that the person that they took out was a decoy and that they don't know where the weapon is now. Days go without any news, but then 19 hours before the checkpoint, Dennis is told that the biochemical bomb was detonated in China. Dennis and Janet rush to the headquarters to see what the next step is, and Elizabeth informs them that China is blaming the attack on America and that they're getting ready to retaliate. Janet argues that there's no proof, so China is just posturing, but Elizabeth tells her that she can't take that risk, and she then orders for a time reset, and Janet starts begging and crying not to do it, but Elizabeth doesn't listen, and the time is reset before the time Janet was pregnant. Janet's devastated for losing her son, but instead of giving up, they try again, and she gets pregnant again, but this time it was a girl. They also manage to pass the checkpoint while also getting pregnant, so she won't be losing her child if there's another reset. She gives birth and things seem to be going okay, but the summer of 2018 incident happens, and Archie and Russ were on their mission to stop